Welcome to Fierce Queen's Reckoning. Let's get into the story. He told Waverly he was stuck at the office. Conference call with Toronto, he said. Could run until midnight. He used the voice she had trusted for 11 years, steady, slightly tired, the voice of a man performing responsibility. He used that voice while standing in the lobby of the Fairmont Hotel on Peel Street, his hand resting on the small of another woman's back, waiting for the elevator to take them to the room he had booked under his company card. Waverly Sinclair was sitting in the hotel bar 20 meters away. She had arrived early for her best friend's birthday dinner. She had ordered a sparkling water and was checking her phone when she looked up and saw her husband walk through the revolving doors. She did not move. She did not call his name. Something older than instinct took over, the part of her that had been quietly collecting data for 3 years without admitting to herself what she was collecting it for. She watched. He did not see her. He never looked for her in rooms anymore. She watched him check in. She watched the woman beside him. Dark hair, silk blouse, roller bag that matched nothing you would bring to a work trip, tuck herself under his arm while he took the key cards from the front desk. She watched them step into the elevator together. She watched the doors close. She picked up her sparkling water. She drank it slowly. She set it back down. Then she opened her phone and sent one text, not to her husband, to the one person who had known her longer than anyone. You need to come downstairs. I'm at the bar. Part 1. The blueprint no one knew. Waverly Sinclair was born in Halifax to parents who built things. Her father, Gordon, was a civil engineer who spent 30 years designing bridges across Atlantic Canada. Her mother, Harriet, not Harriet from the list, a different woman entirely, Harriet Oakes before she married, was an urban planner who believed cities were living systems that either breathed or choked depending on whoever drew the lines. Growing up, Waverly absorbed the lesson without being taught it. Everything visible was built on something invisible. The bridge you drove across, the street you walked down, the neighborhood that felt safe or didn't. All of it was designed by someone who understood load-bearing mathematics better than they understood sentiment. Waverly became an architect. Not the kind who designed celebrity homes and appeared in design magazines. The kind who sat on municipal oversight boards, who reviewed zoning amendments, who spent 3 years fighting to retrofit a decommissioned textile mill in East Hamilton into subsidized housing for single mothers. The kind whose name appeared in city council minutes more often than in newspapers, and who preferred it that way. She was not famous. She was not rich in any way that required explaining. She earned well. Senior partner at a mid-size firm in Montreal, comfortable salary, a reputation in specific professional circles that meant something to the people who mattered in those circles. She drove a sensible car. She rented a duplex on Avenue des Pins, with good windows, and a second bedroom she used as a drafting room. What she did not advertise, because she had learned early that advertising it changed everything, was the property. Her grandmother, Eunice Oakes, had bought land outside of Kelowna in 1961, when it was worth almost nothing. She bought it because she liked the elevation and the light. She bought 3 parcels over 20 years, because she had a small inheritance and nowhere better to put it. When she died, she left it to Waverly's mother. When Waverly's mother died of a stroke at 61, she left all of it to Waverly, along with a note written on the back of a Sobeys receipt that said, "Don't sell to the first person who asks." Or the second. By the time Waverly inherited the land at 32, the Okanagan Valley had transformed. Kelowna was no longer a quiet orchard town. It was one of the fastest-growing cities in Canada. The 3 parcels, totaling just over 40 acres, sat at the edge of a development corridor that every regional developer in British Columbia was circling like hawks over a field. The land was currently assessed at just over $11 million. The figure in Waverly's estate documents was not something she shared at dinner parties. She had watched what money did to people who knew you had it. She had seen it with her brother, who borrowed and never returned. She had seen it in business relationships that curdled the moment a number became known. She had made a quiet decision in the weeks after the estate was settled. She would keep living her life exactly as she had been living it. The land would sit. The land would wait, and the person she chose to share her life with would choose her without the land on the table. She met Brendan Foss at an architecture conference in Vancouver when she was 34. He was presenting a paper on sustainable cladding systems. He was not a brilliant presenter. He spoke too fast and kept clicking ahead of his own slides. But after the session, he found her at the coffee station and asked her a question about thermal massing that was genuinely interesting, and she answered it. And then he asked another one. And then they missed the next panel entirely, and were still talking when the conference center turned off half the lights. He was a project manager at a mid-tier construction firm. Smart enough. Ambitious in a contained way, or so she thought. He asked her what she thought about things. About cities, about design, about whether Montreal winters were actually as miserable as everyone said. He listened to the answers. In her experience, this was rare enough to mean something. They dated long distance for a year. He moved to Montreal. They moved in together. They married at City Hall on a Tuesday in October, with 4 people present, which was exactly how Waverly wanted it. Brendan's contribution to the ceremony was suggesting they get poutine afterward, which she agreed was the right call. She filed that small observation, that he planned nothing and she planned everything, and chose not to examine it closely. Part 2. The architecture of absence. The pattern that established itself in the first years of their marriage was not dramatic. That was the thing about slow erosion. It didn't announce itself. It just happened. The way a river gradually shifts its course, and one day you look up and the water is somewhere else entirely. Waverly managed the household. She managed the finances. She managed the social calendar, which in Montreal meant navigating 2 languages, 2 professional networks, 2 sets of expectations, and 1 mother-in-law who periodically sent passive-aggressive texts in English about the importance of home-cooked meals. Brendan's mother, Paulette Foss, lived in Gatineau and had opinions about everything that was none of her business. She was not cruel. She was the specific type of difficult that is much harder to name than cruelty, the type that wraps control in concern, that offers help while simultaneously communicating that the help is necessary because you are inadequate. She asked Waverly, at their first Christmas dinner, whether she planned to slow down a bit once children arrived. Waverly did not have children. She did not plan to have children. She had told Brendan this before they moved in together, before they married, before anyone asked. Brendan had said he felt the same way. He had never communicated this to his mother. Waverly raised it once. Brendan said his mother meant well. She filed it. Brendan's younger brother Corey found their marriage broadly amusing. He called Waverly the planner in a tone that made it sound like a mild deficiency. He borrowed Brendan's truck without asking, borrowed money without returning it, and appeared at their apartment at irregular intervals expecting to be fed. Waverly fed him. She noted, once aloud, that it would be nice if someone called ahead. Brendan told her she was being rigid. She filed that too. She kept records the way her father kept engineering logs, not because she expected to need them, but because she had been raised in a household where you documented what mattered. She tracked their household expenses in a shared spreadsheet that only she ever updated. She kept a folder of insurance policies, property registrations, service contracts, the name of every contractor who had done work on the duplex, and what they'd charged. She maintained a calendar for both of them, sent reminders for his professional license renewals, remembered the names of his colleagues' partners, and once drove 40 minutes to pick up a gift for his firm's holiday party, because he had forgotten he'd been assigned the task. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, and in the way of people who are good at holding things together, she became so efficient at the task that it became invisible. Meanwhile, the land in Kelowna was accruing value without her touching it. Her estate lawyer sent annual updates. She read them at her desk late at night, after Brendan was asleep, in the blue light of her monitor. The numbers grew. The land remained. She did not tell Brendan the full scope of it. She had mentioned her grandmother's property, once early on in passing, and he had said, "Cool," and moved on, which told her everything she needed to know about his curiosity. Part 3. The mother-in-law. Paulette Foss visited 4 times a year, and each visit followed a script so consistent, Waverly could have drafted it as a project brief. Arrival, warm, voluble, bearing pastries from a bakery in Gatineau that she referenced by name as though Waverly should recognize it. First evening, pleasant enough, compliments on the apartment delivered in a tone that suggested mild surprise that it was as nice as it was. Day 2, the observations. The observations were never criticisms, they were questions. Do you find the kitchen layout practical, Waverly? Some people prefer more counter space. I always found that a bright kitchen made such a difference. Third day, the phone calls. Long private calls with Brendan that Waverly was not invited into. Departure. Embraces, promises to return soon. A pointed comment to Brendan delivered in Waverly's presence about how important it was to make time for family. Waverly was family. She was not included in that sentence. The exclusion was consistent enough to have been policy. Paulette texted Brendan about family news, a cousin's engagement, a nephew's hockey tournament. And Waverly learned about it when Brendan mentioned it days later. When Brendan's aunt passed away, Waverly found out via a Facebook post. When Paulette decided to renovate her bathroom and wanted Brendan's input, she called him on a Saturday morning while Waverly was making breakfast, and they spoke for an hour, and no one asked Waverly, who was, professionally, an expert in spatial planning and renovation logistics, anything at all. She raised it with Brendan once, calmly, with specific examples, the way she would raise a design concern in a project meeting. He looked at her with the expression she had cataloged by then, the look of a man encountering a problem he would prefer to classify as not a problem. She's not trying to exclude you, Wav. That's just how she is. She's not great at, reaching out. She reaches out to you every other day. That's different. I'm her son. Waverly did not raise it again. She noted it. She closed the folder. Corey, for his part, had developed a specific talent for making her feel like a guest in her own home. He never did anything overt. He called her babe in a way that wasn't affectionate, borrowed items without asking, and once spent a weekend on their couch recovering from what he described as a situation that he never fully explained. Waverly gave him the spare blankets. She cooked an extra portion. She didn't ask about the situation. She was performing hospitality the way she had always performed it, completely, without acknowledgement, to people who never thought to wonder about the effort. She was very tired by year 8. She did not know how tired until the night of the Fairmont. Part 4. The hotel. Waverly had been in Toronto for 6 days. Continuing education requirement. A professional development seminar on accessibility standards in new construction, followed by a 2-day working session with a municipal planning team she'd been consulting for. 6 days in a hotel room with bad pillows, eating room service, and thinking in the particular clear way she always thought when she was alone. She called Brendan every evening. He answered most of the time. He sounded normal. He asked about the seminar in the vague way people ask when they are performing interest, and she answered briefly because she knew he wasn't really listening. He mentioned that Corey had stopped by. He said everything at home was fine. On the last evening, she confirmed her travel home. Flight's at 7. I'll be back before noon.
Do you want to do something for dinner?
He said, sure. Yeah, definitely. We'll figure it out when you land. And she recognized that as the answer of a man who had not thought about it and would not. Her flight landed at Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport on schedule. Her phone buzzed with a message from her friend Simone. Still on for tonight. Fairmont Bar, 7 p.m. Bring your good earrings. And Waverly texted back, I'll be there, and then texted Brendan, landed. Heading home first, then I have Simone's thing tonight at the Fairmont. Don't wait up. No reply. She went home, dropped her bag, showered, changed. She took the metro because parking downtown on a Friday night wasn't worth it. She arrived at the Fairmont 20 minutes early, found a seat at the bar with a clear sight line to the lobby, and ordered sparkling water because the wine list was expensive, and she was in no particular mood for wine. She was looking at her phone when the revolving doors moved, and there was Brendan, in the jacket she had bought him for his birthday. Charcoal wool, rice. She remembered the cost because she'd considered it a splurge. Hair freshly cut, no laptop bag. Smiling at someone beside him with a particular quality of smile she had not seen in years. Not the comfortable, distracted smile of a man at home, but the smile of a man performing his best self. The woman beside him was pulling a small weekender bag. She was laughing at something he said. Her hand found his arm. Waverly watched them approach the front desk. She watched Brendan produce his wallet. She watched the desk agent hand over 2 key cards. She watched Brendan rest his hand on the woman's back. The same gesture of easy possession she had once loved, now translated into something unreadable, and she watched them cross the lobby to the elevator. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed. Waverly set her sparkling water down. She picked up her phone and texted Simone. You need to come downstairs. I'm at the bar. She sat with what she knew for the 4 minutes it took Simone to appear. She did not cry. She did not shake. She felt something move through her that was not grief and not rage. It was something geometrically precise, a recalculation. The kind that happens when you realize the foundation you've been building on has been misread from the beginning. And the only reasonable response is to go back to the original survey data and start again. Simone appeared, coat half on, reading Waverly's face. What happened? Brendan is upstairs, Waverly said. With someone else. I just watched them check in. Simone sat down. How long have you known? About 60 seconds, Waverly said, officially. Part 5. The kitchen table. Brendan came home the following afternoon. He smelled like hotel soap and the particular complacency of a man who believes his story is holding. He dropped his keys on the counter, opened the fridge, said, "Hey, you're back early." And then he turned around and saw Waverly sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a folder, and something in his face shifted. She had spent the morning preparing, not anxiously, the way she prepared for any significant presentation, gathering documents, arranging them in order, knowing exactly what she was going to say and in what sequence. "How was Toronto?" he said. "Informative," she said. "How was your week?" "Fine, quiet, missed you." She looked at him for a moment. "I called you Friday evening. You didn't answer." "Yeah, I had a thing with the guys. Phone died." "Which guys?" A pause, small, barely perceptible. But she had been reading his pauses for 11 years. "Just some guys from the site, you don't know them." She opened the folder. Inside was a hotel bill, not hers. A copy she had obtained that morning through channels available to a woman who spent her professional life navigating municipal bureaucracy, and had learned along the way that information flows to people who know which office to call. Brendan Foss, Fairmont, Montreal. Friday check-in, Saturday check-out. Room 81. She placed it on the table and turned it to face him. He looked at it. His expression moved through several phases very quickly. She watched all of them. "I was in the lobby," she said. Her voice was even, not cold. She had decided against cold, because cold requires effort, and she was done spending effort on Brendan Foss. "I was sitting at the bar waiting for Simone. I watched you check in. I watched you cross the lobby. I watched you get in the elevator with her." The kitchen was quiet. The building's heating system ticked. Outside, a delivery truck reversed with its warning beep, "Waverly." She pulled a second document from the folder. Credit card statement. 3 restaurants she didn't recognize. Table for 2 Thursday evenings. A pattern that had persisted for several months. A weekend in Ottawa in March that he had described as a work trip. A spa booking, 2 people, in Tremblant, made on a Saturday morning while she was running along the canal. She laid them out one by one, the way her father laid out engineering drawings, methodically, without drama, because the evidence was the argument and it didn't require performance. "This started at least 14 months ago," she said. "You weren't careful. You were never careful, because you never believed you'd be caught. And you never believed you'd be caught, because you never looked closely enough at me to understand what I notice." He put his hands on the counter. His knuckles were pale. "It was a mistake. It got out of hand. I can end it. 14 months is not a mistake. 14 months is a decision you kept making, every week, for over a year." She closed the folder. She placed her hands flat on the table. She looked at him without the particular softness she had been wearing for 11 years. The patience, the accommodation, the careful management of her own visibility. She looked at him the way she looked at a load-bearing wall she was about to redesign. "I want a divorce. You can stay in the second bedroom until we've worked out the logistics. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements. We have a life here. 11 years. We have 11 years. Yes. Which is why this conversation is happening here instead of through my lawyer's office, because I thought you deserved to hear it from me first. That's the last courtesy I'll extend." She stood. She picked up the folder. She walked toward the hallway. "Waverly, please. I'll end it tonight. I'll call her right now." She stopped. She did not turn around. "You should know something, Brendan, before you start planning your next move." She turned just enough to let him see her profile. "I am not the woman you think I am. I have never been." She walked to her drafting room. She closed the door. She sat at her desk, and she was still for a moment, 30 seconds, maybe 40. And then she opened her laptop and wrote 3 emails. One to her estate lawyer in Kelowna. One to her firm's senior partner. One to a land development consultant she had been talking to, casually, for 2 years about the 40 acres and what they might someday become. The pieces were already on the board. She had simply been waiting to decide whether to play. She had decided. Part 6. The Revelation. The divorce filing was straightforward. The complications came from what the filing uncovered. Not for Waverly, who had known the shape of things for years, but for Brendan, who discovered that the life he had been living had different dimensions than he'd understood. The first thing he learned was about the duplex. They had rented it in both names, but the furniture, the renovations, the small improvements that had made it comfortable, the kitchen shelving, the bathroom tile, the custom desk she had built into the drafting room, had been funded entirely by Waverly, through a personal account she maintained separately. Her lawyer documented this with the same methodical precision Waverly brought to everything. Brendan's lawyer looked at the file and went very quiet. The second thing happened 3 weeks after the filing, and it happened publicly. Waverly had been sitting on a decision about the Kelowna land for 2 years. A development consortium based in Vancouver had been proposing a mixed-income residential project. A real one, not the investor pad towers that had swallowed other parts of the valley, but a thoughtfully designed community with green space, affordable units, and a design process that involved the existing neighborhood. The lead architect was someone Waverly respected. The terms were terms her grandmother would have approved of. She accepted the offer. The sale closed for $9.4 million. The Vancouver consortium issued a press release. A regional business publication ran a brief item. Kelowna land sale signals major development for Valley Corridor. The 42-acre parcel, held in the Oaks Family Trust, was sold by Montreal-based architect Waverly Sinclair, granddaughter of original landowner Eunice Oaks. There was a photograph of Waverly, taken at a professional event the previous year. She was wearing a gray blazer. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who knew what things were worth. Brendan saw the article on a Thursday. His project manager sent it to him with a question mark. Brendan stared at his phone for a long time. He had been married to her for 11 years. He had known about the grandmother's land in the vague, unexamined way he knew about many things in his marriage, as background information that he had categorized as unimportant and never revisited. He had not Googled Oaks Family Trust. He had not asked what the land was assessed at. He had not asked, in 11 years of marriage, a single pointed question about his wife's finances, because he had assumed, with the particular confidence of a man who never doubted his own centrality, that he understood the situation. He had understood almost nothing. The third development was the one that stayed with him longest. Waverly had spent 11 years consulting on a social housing project in the east end of Montreal. The project had stalled repeatedly due to funding gaps. 2 weeks after the Kelowna sale, the Oaks Fund, a newly established charitable vehicle bearing her grandmother's name, made a donation that filled the gap and allowed construction to begin. The announcement ran in a local paper with a photograph of the construction site and a quote from the city councilor responsible for housing. The councilor mentioned Waverly by name. The quote called her a quiet and long-standing champion of this project. Quiet. Waverly Sinclair, who Brendan had called rigid, who his mother had called particular, who Corey had called the planner, like it, was a mild affliction. Quiet. Brendan read the article in his rental apartment, sitting on the air mattress he had been sleeping on for 3 weeks, because he had not gotten around to buying furniture. The heating in the unit was erratic. He had burned 2 separate pots of pasta in the first week, and subsequently been living largely on takeout containers, stacked beside the recycling bin he kept forgetting to put out. He had called Waverly 14 times in the 3 weeks since the filing. She answered 3 of them. Each time she answered, she was cordial, specific, and brief. She answered the question he had asked. She did not ask questions in return. She had become exactly as present as he needed her to be, and no more, and it was the most disorienting experience of his life. Part 7. The Collapse. Without Waverly, Brendan Foss's life did not fall apart dramatically. It fell apart in the specific, accumulative way of a building with a design flaw. Each individual failure small, each one individually manageable, but together adding up to a structure that couldn't hold its own weight. The building superintendent called about the lease renewal, and Waverly's name was on the account, and Brendan didn't know the process. The car insurance came up for renewal, and he didn't know which company they used. The dentist's office called to confirm an appointment, and he realized he didn't know the name of the clinic. He called Waverly. She answered, gave him the information, and ended the call. He called again 2 days later. She answered, gave him the information, ended the call. By the 4th call, she stopped answering. Paulette arrived from Gatineau. She lasted 9 days. She cleaned the rental apartment, which Brendan accepted without comment. She organized his kitchen, which took 40 minutes because there was almost nothing in it. She made calls to the insurance company and the dentist. She put the lease renewal through. She figured out the building's recycling schedule. At the end of 9 days, she called Corey. I didn't understand, she said, how much she was doing. I don't know what I thought. I thought she was particular. She was good at it, Mom. She was the only one who was good at anything, and we made her feel like it was a character flaw. There was a long pause. I want to call her. She won't take it well. I don't mean to apologize for Brendan. I mean, I made it harder. The visits. The things I said. She was keeping everything running, and I walked into her home and criticized her counter space. This was the most honest assessment Paulette Foss had ever made, and she made it too late, to the wrong person. In a rental apartment that smelled like takeout containers, with a son who was sleeping on an air mattress and hadn't yet processed what he had lost. Corey, for his part, stopped calling. Not because he was ashamed, though perhaps he should have been, but because there was nothing left to borrow. The woman, her name was Renee, lasted about as long as you would expect. She had been drawn to Brendan as he had presented himself, capable, organized, with a life that felt solid and considered. The solidity and consideration had been Waverly's. When Renee encountered the real Brendan, the one who forgot things, who didn't plan, who responded to every domestic complexity with vague optimism and inaction, she did what any reasonable person would do. She reassessed. She texted Brendan on a Tuesday. She was kind about it. She said she didn't think they were right for each other. She wished him well. Brendan sat for a long time on the air mattress and thought about the fact that two different women had now left him in the same year, for reasons that were, at the core, the same reason. Part 8. The woman she actually was. Waverly bought the house in Rosemont 2 months after the filing. She bought it because she had always liked the neighborhood, the streets with trees, the proximity to the market, the particular quality of the light in winter, and because it was time to stop renting someone else's architecture. It was a 1940s brick semi-detached that had been renovated badly in the 90s and needed to be thought through properly. Waverly thought through it. She drew the plans herself. She knew exactly which walls to take out and which to keep, which windows to enlarge, how to open the back of the house to the garden without compromising the thermal envelope. She moved in with her drafting table and her books and the small olive tree she'd been keeping alive in the old apartment for 7 years. The second bedroom became a proper guest room for the first time. The third bedroom she turned into the drafting studio she should have had a decade ago. North-facing window, good desk lamp, shelves for models and samples, and the flat files her father had given her when he retired. She worked. She had always worked well, but there was a quality to the work now that felt different, less subdivided, less interrupted by the background management of someone else's life. She took on a project she had been hesitant about. A community center redesign in Laval, with a tricky site and a client committee that communicated exclusively by group text. She thrived on both counts. The Oaks Fund found its footing. Waverly had not intended to run a charitable foundation, but she discovered that the skills she had spent a decade applying to household logistics and professional project management translated, with very little adjustment, to running a grant-making organization, with rigorous intake processes and clear strategic goals. She hired a part-time administrator. She set up an advisory committee. She put out a call for applications. An interview appeared in a city planning journal, the kind with a small readership and a significant professional reach. The piece was about housing advocacy in Montreal, and Waverly was one of 3 people profiled. The photograph showed her standing in the half-renovated kitchen of the Laval Community Center, holding a set of drawings, looking at something off-camera with the expression of a person thinking about a problem they already know how to solve. The profile mentioned her decade of work on the East End housing project. It mentioned the Oaks Fund. It mentioned in one sentence that she had recently completed a significant land transaction in British Columbia. Brendan's project manager sent it to him. "Isn't this your ex?" Brendan read it twice. He did not recognize the person in the photograph, which confused him until he understood that he was recognizing her correctly. She looked like herself. She looked like the full version of herself, the one that had apparently always existed and that he had simply never thought to look for. Part 9. The Reckoning. Brendan called on a Sunday in February. It was the first time he had called since she'd stopped answering, and she let it ring 3 times before she picked up. Waverly. He sounded different. The project manager confidence was gone. What remained was the sound of someone calling from inside a situation he didn't know how to get out of. "Can we talk? Not through the lawyers. Just, can we talk?" "We can talk," she said. She was standing in her kitchen, her new kitchen, the one she had designed with the south-facing window, and the long island, and the pale oak shelves. She had learned, among many things, that she liked cooking when she wasn't cooking for someone else. "I read the article. In the planning journal." "I know," she said. "Simone texted me. I didn't know about the land. I didn't know the full. I didn't understand what you were." He stopped. Started again. "I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone stating a fact that has been documented and is no longer up for discussion. You didn't ask about my family. You didn't ask about my finances. You didn't ask how the household ran, or where the money went, or what I was working on professionally, or what I wanted. You didn't ask because you weren't curious about me. You were comfortable with what I provided. That's not fair. It's accurate. Those are different things. A long pause. My mother wants to reach out to you. Your mother spent 11 years treating me like an inconvenience. She's welcome to email. I'll respond when I have time. She feels terrible. I'm sure she does. Waverly looked out her south-facing window. February light, low and sharp, the kind that made the ice on the back garden glitter. Feeling terrible is a start. It doesn't change the 11 years. A longer pause. The Laval project. The community center you're redesigning. His voice had shifted. She recognized the register. Project manager mode. Pivoting. My firm has been trying to connect with the client committee for 6 months. We put in a tender that didn't get shortlisted, and I can't get a meeting. I thought. If you knew anyone on the... You want me to make a professional introduction for you, she said. For the project I'm working on. With the committee I've built a relationship with. You want me to use my professional network to benefit your career. Silence. I'm going to say this clearly, Brendan, because I think it's the kind of thing that needs to be said directly. She picked up her coffee cup, set it down. You called me rigid for 11 years. You let your mother make me feel like a houseguest in my own marriage. You let your brother treat our home like a hotel. And you spent 14 months lying to me about where you were and who you were with. And now you're calling to ask for a professional favor because you read an article and you know what my professional network is worth. I wasn't. The Oaks Fund's contact information is on our website, she said. If Corey wants to connect about programming, he can submit an inquiry through the standard form, same as anyone else. And the Laval Client Committee makes its own decisions. I don't intervene in their process, and I wouldn't, even if I wanted to. She heard him breathing. I built a life with you, he said, and his voice broke slightly on the last word. 11 years. You lived inside a life I built, she said. Those are different things, too. She was not angry when she said it. She had moved past anger months ago, into something much quieter and much more stable. Clarity, maybe. Or just the particular piece of a woman who has stopped arguing with her own measurements. You had 11 years to be curious about your own wife. You spent them assuming you understood me because I was convenient. The moment I stopped being convenient, you learned I was a stranger. She paused. That's not my failure, Brendan. That's yours. She ended the call. She set her phone face down, on the counter. She stood in the kitchen she had designed, and felt the particular quality of silence that only exists in rooms where you don't have to be anyone other than who you are. Outside, a chickadee landed on the bare branch of the rowan she had planted against the fence. She watched it. Then she turned back to her coffee, and her drawings, and her morning. Part 10. The ground she was standing on. On an evening in late March, Waverly Sinclair sat at her drafting table, with the plans for the Laval Community Center spread out in front of her, and a mug of tea going cold at her elbow. The olive tree was flowering. It did this occasionally, against all reasonable expectation, in the corner of the studio by the north window. The light was the kind of clear blue that comes after a week of overcast, and the city felt rinsed and specific. She had been at the table since noon. She did not feel the time. She thought about what it meant that she had spent 11 years making herself smaller. Not weaker, she had never been weak, but smaller. Occupying less space than she was entitled to, managing more than her share, minimizing her own presence, so as not to be too much for people who would have found her too much regardless. She had made herself quiet, and the quietness had not made her loved. It had made her convenient. She thought about her grandmother Eunice, who had bought land in the Okanagan in 1961, because she liked the elevation and the light. No committee, no consultants, just a woman who knew what she was looking at and had the clarity to act on it. Waverly had inherited the land and spent years treating it as background, as the thing that waited while her real life happened in other rooms, in other people's stories, in the long, unrewarded work of holding someone else's world together. The land had turned out to be the ground she was standing on. It had waited, as good foundations do, while she figured that out. She picked up her pen. She made 3 notations on the community center drawings: a corridor adjustment, a window placement, a small change to the entrance sequence that would make arrivals feel welcomed rather than processed. Small decisions that would quietly change how thousands of people experience the building over the next 50 years. That was what she did. She made decisions that lasted. She had always made decisions that lasted. She simply hadn't been applying them to her own life. She opened her laptop. She had 14 unread emails, 2 of which were grant applications to the Oaks Fund, from organizations she had been hoping would apply. She read them carefully. She made notes. She would bring them to the advisory committee in April. Her phone lit up. Simone, dinner Thursday? New Haitian place on Beaubien. I'm told the griot will change your life. She smiled. She texted back. Thursday works. I'll book. She set the phone down. She looked at the drawings. She looked at the olive tree. She looked at the clean-edged plans of a building that would serve people who needed it. Built on land that a woman had chosen because she liked the light. Funded in part by a sale that Waverly had made, when she finally decided to stop waiting and start building. Some women grieve the years they spent becoming smaller. Some women refused to count them at all. Waverly Sinclair counted them. She counted everything. It was in her nature. And then she did what any good architect does when the existing structure no longer serves its purpose. She assessed the foundation. She kept what was solid. She drew new lines. And she built something better. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We tell stories about women who find out what they've been standing on all along. The next one is already waiting.